For those of us who had the good fortune to work for the Appalachian Mountain Club in the Huts, the experience enriched us in many ways. It helped shape our personalities, and for many, it shaped and guided our careers. The hard physical work of packing, the daily chores of reaming the hut, cooking for huge crowds of hungry hikers, and answering their seemingly endless questions were tempered by the camaraderie we shared during raids, pack day excursions, and days off. At the annual Fall Fest reunion in November of 2018, a crew member from each of the decades, beginning with the 1940s, shared anecdotes and memories of their time in the huts. It was an evening of reflection punctuated with frequent laughter, where we looked back and took note of how much had changed and how much had stayed the same in AMC huts. I'm Liz Seabury, and I worked in the huts from 1977 to 1981. I think, like in the other decades, what was happening at the huts mirrored what was going on in society at that time. In the 70s, Title IX was passed in 1972, mandating equal spending on men's and women's sports, among other things. Many historically male colleges went co-ed. The first Earth Day was in 1970, beginning a new chapter in the environmental movement. And the civil rights struggles that had really been fought, a lot of them in the 1960s, I think were filtering through in the 70s, and there was more awareness of diversity. And likewise in the huts, I feel like it was a real decade of transition. Probably the biggest change was the inclusion of women in the high huts. Starting in 1973, women joined the crews, and the numbers grew steadily. My daughter tells me she loves looking at the crew photos at the huts and having such a clear visual of the progression from these all-male crews to 1 woman, to 2 women, to 3, to 4. So it's something you can even just see just by looking at the wall. I began working in 1977 at Madison. And even after a few years of women working in the huts, for me, I feel like the hut boy culture was still really the dominant culture. It felt competitive, strong, and rambunctious. And all the hut history was about men. When I looked at the crew photos on the wall or flipped the benches in the dining room to sweep the floor, I didn't see the presence of women. And it's interesting, when I was getting ready for this, I talked to some other people, and I realized I never worked on a crew with another woman who had more experience than I did. I was either the most experienced or somebody had the same. And I remember at Mizpah, there was a painting of a crew from the mid-1970s. And in that painting, there was 1 woman on the crew, and she was shown knitting. And underneath was a caption that said, "Finished her knitting and went home." And I remember thinking, well, I guess she couldn't cut it. I tried to fit in, packing heavy loads, washing dishes, as quickly as I could, hanging out in the crew room. My second year, I was at Mizpah and worked with Catherine Bramhall, who's here tonight, Catherine. She seemed impervious to the old culture, and she had a free spirit about her. She was fun and silly and kind, and set a relaxed and accepting tone. I felt like I could just be myself. Instead of assimilating to the old hut culture, it felt like we were molding a new one. In 1979, I don't know who the credit goes to for this, maybe Peggy and Dawson can help me, there was a ladies' get-together at Tux. We got formal invitation. Betsy do. I think we got formal invitations, and we dressed up in our finest clothes. White gloves were encouraged but not required. And then we partied it up and we made our voices heard. It felt important, like we had arrived and that we could do things our way too. Women weren't the only change in the crews. More and more hut people were from the middle class and public universities. There were hippies too, with ponytails, beards, and new attitudes. As Ken said, we also began to pay attention to the environment and recognize the importance of stewardship and education. There were changes to camping regulations, waste disposal, campfire usage, and group size. Carry in, carry out began, and low impact camping. There were no more tents on the tundra. After dinner, we were encouraged to teach about the flora and fauna, and I was always really grateful that there were only 3 kinds of trees at Tree Line. And we led nature walks. During my first few years, we hauled the food garbage out to the gaboons, where the maggots would feast on it. Human waste went to a leaching field or got flown out by helicopter. But then, like just a couple years later, at Galehead, we were already composting the human waste. So just a huge change in a couple of years. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich assembly lines, which were mostly manned by the goofers, came to an end because probably most of them did not get eaten. They were pretty terrible lunches. And also, the turkey dinners and that kind of thing came to an end, and we had these one-pot meals. And I think I remember Hawaiian chicken. Ugh. Yeah, I don't think that was the high point of hut culinary life. With all the changes that were taking place, we also shared a lot of fun with the huts of the decades before and after. We performed BFDs, during which, of course, the guys loved to put on dresses. We enjoyed carrying goofer loads and basking in the admiration of the hikers. We hosted some hut legends like Al Folger with his crackers and can of cheese and bourbon renewal, and Bob Daniels. And Kibby, we were entertained by Kibby, and we learned to cook from Dave Wilson. We drank, and we smoked pot. We skinny dipped, and then we got to skinny dip co-ed, because now we had co-ed huts. The prize raid item at the time was the propeller. In 1978, when I was at MISPA with Pierre Ruggiero, Andy Broderick, David Huntley, and Catherine, we developed into a raiding machine. We raided by day and by night. We snuck in after lights out, and we executed power raids. After about 6 weeks, we had virtually every raid item in the hut system, and the other huts were not happy. So after the hut masters meeting in August, all the hut masters hiked up to MISPA, overpowered Catherine, who stood back and just said, peace. And they took everything back. We loved being in the mountains, and we felt the privilege of working in the huts, carrying on traditions and making new ones. Changes had begun, and there was no turning back. Thank you. Thank you.